So today we're going to be talking about giving presentations. Robin was talking this morning about the importance of authority, right? Authority, celebrity, and trust. What I believe is there's no more valuable tool to building your business than being on stage in front of other people, right? I was born in a trailer park in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It is still there, right? I grew up poor. I got a paper route when I was 12 years old so that I could buy pants that went all the way down to my shoes, right? I didn't have any advantages that anybody in this room doesn't have, and I was just interviewing Robert Herjavec. That's insane, right? That is insane. And the reason I'm standing there interviewing Robert Herjavec is because I stood up in front of 6 people 18 years ago for free to help out a friend, and somebody was there who invited me to speak at an event, and I spoke at that event, and it went well, and somebody invited me to speak at another event. Does that make sense? It was speaking. It wasn't, hey, I'd do great interviewing some famous Shark TV person. Some people would volunteer for it, right? You don't have to pay me. I'll come do it, right? Me, let me do it, right? Being up in front of the room is the most powerful thing that you can do, because most of the people, you know me from sort of some other things, but if people just walk in and you're up front, people figure there must be a reason, right? There must be a reason. Robin said, how do you signal authority? Guess what one of the ways is? Hey, shut the fuck up. I'm up here, you're out there, right? That's one of the ways. When people walk in and they chose yours from a series of other ones, right, in this particular situation, or even they don't, someone chose you to be the only person on stage in front of thousands of people, people automatically assume you've got something to say, right? You just have to not screw it up after that. So there's nothing more powerful, right? There's absolutely nothing more powerful, and that's why I'm so passionate about this, and that's why I think that this is so important, right? So that's one of the things that I want you to think about today is what's the value that this could create for my business, right? What's the value that create for my business? Not tomorrow, right? Not tomorrow. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years if you invest in this, right? Some of the people, how many of you have done like one of the books or you've done one of the movies or something like that, right? When you first do the first book on the first day, does it immediately completely change everybody's perception of you and change your life and your business? Probably not. You do the second book, you add the movie, you keep going, you've done it over time, you do some articles, now people start contacting you from the local media, and even that, local media, start where you can. You start doing those kind of things. It's the same thing with speaking. I can trace what I'm doing right now in April of 2023 to a free talk that I did to help a lady out in front of 12 people in Portland, Oregon in 2011. There was one person there who was a member of Entrepreneurs Organization. They saw me, they told their group, they have chapters all over the world. I've since spoken to hundreds of chapters all over the world. But there's a coaching organization that works with a lot of EO companies, and they're in Franklin, Tennessee, just down the road where Robin's from, and where TMT is headquartered. And they contacted me to do some work with them, and one of their employees was Ryan Markell, and then Ryan quit working there and started working for Robin, and Robin said, hey Dave, I saw you at that. What did he see me do? He saw me speaking. I saw you at that, and we need speakers. Maybe you could come speak at this thing, right? And it took a little while, and we finally made it happen, and then I did a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and now all of a sudden, I'm just rushing to take care of Robert Herjavec and hanging out with him in the elevator and making jokes with somebody from Shark Tank, right? That's insane, right? But it happened through a series of small things, but all came from speaking. And I'm going to be fully honest with you right here. Not only is it the best way, for me, it's the only way. You're all better than me. Every single person in this room. Last year, I was at boot camp, and I was sitting in the back in the green room, and Robin was talking about your cost for acquiring a new customer. Right? But she was using some kind of acronym, so I asked the person next to me, what's that about, cost? They're like, well, you pay the money to do the things, and then you get a customer, it costs you a certain amount. I was like, oh, that's not good. It'd be better if they just like called you up and said, do you want to do it? And guess what people do when you're a speaker, right? People go to my website, there's a thing that says hire Dave to speak, and they fill out a form and they say, do you want to get money to come to our event? And the only thing I have is doing a good enough job at that event that somebody there sees it and says, you know what, Dave, you should. And just 2 days ago, I did a call with an accounting firm in Atlanta, and their partner is part of another organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, which I'll use that as a tip right now. So tell stories in your talks. We're going to talk about that. Tell stories. But one of the ways to get more speeches is to do what I call spider webs, right? And what a spider web means is it's an organization that has all sorts of connections to all sorts of other groups. And so any organization that has those connections internally, so EO, is anybody here an EO member? I know I saw Ryan before. Yeah, we have a few of them. So EO is called Entrepreneurs Organization. If your business is over $1 million and you founded it, you can join EO so that when you have payroll problems, you have somebody to talk to other than your brother-in-law who doesn't even have a job and can't understand, right? EO is a chance to connect with other entrepreneurs. But here's the thing, they have chapters in cities all over the United States and all over the world. So when you speak for one EO chapter and you do a decent job, what do? Oh, you should head over to LA and talk to Derek's group, and then you should head over to Houston, and then you should head over to Dallas, and oh, hey, we're doing a thing over in Spain if you want to, right? It's a spider web, right? They're all connected. And YPO is the same thing, Young Presidents Organizations, so they have different guidelines. I don't know exactly what they are. I think your business has to be closer to like 50 million or something like that. You have to be the CEO, and you have to have like 50 employees or something like that. But same thing, if you can speak to one YPO group, if it goes well, you can speak to another and another and another and another because they're all connected, right? They're all connected in a similar way to you trying to get a vertical. If you're trying to work with lawyers, once you get good and work with a couple law firms, if they start telling other people, you start to be seen as the law firm guy or the law firm MSP, right? So that's just a tip that made me think of that. But this is all I have, right? All I have is being good enough, and then that's why they asked me to do talks about how are you good, and I'll tell you a story about that. I don't know, right? I don't know. So I have a sister-in-law, and she teaches at Yale, and she teaches English as a second language. So there are people who are really smart all over the world who get accepted to Yale University, but they don't speak English. And at Yale University, they only speak English. So if you're really smart, but you can't speak English, it's hard to study in America. So you have to take something called the Test of English as a Foreign Language. And that's what my sister-in-law teaches. She teaches this class where at the end you try to pass this test of English as a foreign language, and if you can do it, you can go to Yale, right? So she emails me one day and she says, hey Dave, can I use one of your videos in my class? Because I teach people presentation skills, how to communicate from the front of the room, in meetings, and how to be successful. And can I use your video to show people the 4 things that you should do to engage with an audience? And I was like, yeah, you can use my video on one condition. Does anybody know what the condition was? Tell me what the 4 things are. She's like, oh, no, you're doing them. And I'm like, I know I'm doing them. I mean, that's, yeah, obviously. Like, obviously I'm doing them. I know that part. But I was just like, I thought it'd be cool, like, if you could tell me, like, you just tell me, like, I know. I want to know if you know, like, what I'm doing, right? How many of you would like to know the 4 things, right? Because this was a game changer for me. And I even started using this with my college students. I used to be a college professor. I started using this with my college students, and their presentations got better immediately. They went from awful to sometimes phenomenal with just do these 4 things, and even if you just do each of them once, your presentation will be better, especially when you're doing some of like the vendor stuff on stage kind of things. Just get up there, do these things, right? So the first one was ask questions, right? Ask questions. So here's the best way to ask a question. You know, never say, what do you think the gross domestic product of the Netherlands was in the early 1960s before the tulip boom? Anybody? Right? That's a terrible question. Every question you ask is a raise your hand or don't raise your hand question, right? And it almost always starts like this. How many of you want to be a better speaker, right? That's what you do. And you have people buy into whatever it is you're doing, even if it's obvious that they're going to want, right? But I helped a guy, Matt Kale, did it, and he won the Golden Cone when he did it. He was going to do this talk about how he got all his customers on a webinar, and in 12 minutes, he got them all to sign up for all these extra services. And it wasn't just his customers, it was the shitty ones, right? How many of you have shitty customers, right? But he framed it, so his opening question was, how many of you have customers who you don't charge enough because they're legacy clients and you like them and you just have a hard time doing anything other than just helping them out, right? And people couldn't do it because it was virtual, but what's the answer to that? And how many of you have too many of those? And how many of you are just pissing you off and just ruining your life? And then he said, and how many of you dread having a conversation with them about how you need to change their pricing? And now every hand who wasn't even up the first time, they're like, well, now you're speaking to me. What did you do? You just said, you want to hear what I have to say. Do you see how powerful that is? Because if you don't, you assume, well, what other reason is it that you're in the room? You need people to remind themselves that they need what you have. Does that make sense? And you do it with a question. When I used to teach college courses, it also sets a different kind of tone for a presentation. When I taught college courses, I would walk into the room, and instead of doing that classic thing you see people do in the movies, they like write their name on the board, and they're like, I'm Dr. Rendall, and we're here to learn about management. That sets a tone, and here's the tone it sets. I'm up front. I know, you don't. I'm a doctor. You're not. I'm smart. You're not. I talk. You listen. Does that make sense? When you walk in the room, and I would write a question on the board, I wouldn't even tell my name. They don't even know who I am. It's the first night of class, right? And some of them weren't paying attention. They're not looking at the syllabus. I walk in. I write a question on the board. When it's motivation night, I write, who is someone that you want to motivate? And what do you want to motivate them to do? And there's 25 people in the room, right? 25 adults. These are non-traditional students. They have families. They have jobs. Who's somebody you want to motivate? What do you want to motivate them to do? We go around the room for an hour. Oh, you want to get your kid to clean up their room. Okay, you want to get your husband to get promoted at work. You want to get the HR lady to file your paperwork, and it's been sitting on her desk for weeks. Does that make sense? And everybody's got a thing. What are you trying to get them to do? What have you tried so far that isn't working? And by the time we're done with that hour, is everybody motivated to learn about motivation? Yeah, because I started with a question. Now, here's the question, though. Did everybody have those motivational challenges coming in? Absolutely. Was everyone aware of them until I asked the question? No. They're just like, oh. Here's what they're thinking. It's 6 o'clock at night. They worked all day. This class is going until 10 o'clock at night. You know what they're thinking? Oh, I didn't get the McDonald's drive-thru was so long, I didn't even get any dinner. Just like I didn't get any lunch because I was running from MC to Robert Herjavec to here, but that's because I care about you, and I'm going to be fine, right? I'm going to be fine. I bring lunch with me everywhere that I go. It's going to be fine, right? It's going to be fine, okay? But they're thinking, my babysitter's already texted me and say that they need to leave early tonight. They're already exhausted from a long day of work. Their boss might have given them some shitty feedback during the day. Are they aware that they're going to benefit from what I'm teaching them that night? No. So I take an hour out of 4 hours to remind them, but what I'm doing is I'm making it applicable. Not only is this important to you, but I'm going to help you solve a problem tonight, right, in class. And so when they come back from the first break and I say, how would you like to learn some 5 motivational strategies? What's the answer, right? Yeah, hell yeah, let's go. In fact, we wish you would, let's get this going, right? Let's get this going. So the first one is ask a question, right? And again, simple question that people, how many of you, and here's what you need to know the answer. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. You remember that from OJ, right? If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Don't ask a question you don't know the answer to, right? You're asking 2 kinds of questions. You want everyone to raise their hand, or you want no one to raise their hand. Does that make sense? And you need to pretty much know. Now, not no one. It can be 2, right? And then you can laugh, be like, look at these 2, right? And you don't want to do that, right? Don't do that. But you want either everyone to raise their hand mostly, right, or almost no one to raise their hand. But you want to know that answer because you're not asking a question. You're just trying to get them to acknowledge something you know about them. How many of you are frustrated with? How many of you are tired with? How many of you are tired? Does that make sense? How many of you are exhausted? How many of you, right? I asked a question before one of my events. How many of you would like more energy at the end of the day than you had at the beginning of the day? Oh, people are like, oh, yeah. Right? And now what are they doing? They're paying attention, right? They're paying attention. So the first one is questions. The next one is quotes, right? Quotes. Somebody tell me, why would you use a quote? Why would you use a quote from someone else? You're up there. You're up front. Why are you using a quote from someone else? Yeah, you're validating that authority. Basically what you're saying is don't listen to me. Listen to Martin Luther King Jr. I don't care how good you think you are. That's better. Does that make sense? So what you're saying is don't listen to me. Ta-da, right? And it doesn't have to be Martin Luther King Jr. It's somebody in the MSP space. It's somebody in IT. It's Bill Gates. It's a Steve Jobs quote. It's a Tim. Does that make sense? It could be somebody even more niche. It could be somebody in one of the verticals. It could be some legal person if you're talking to legal people. It could be some CPA quote. It could be one of the sharks. It could be a celebrity, right? Now, here's what I tell you about quotes just real fast. With quotes, they either need to know the person immediately and value that person's credibility, or you have to plan to spend some time explaining it. Does that make sense? But you can't just be, how many of you have ever heard of, and then no hands go up, and you're like, well, this is a good quote. Let's go for it. Well, you should read that book. You didn't get what you wanted from it because if nobody knows who they are, there's no borrowed credibility. Does that make sense? So make sure you know, or plan to say, probably a lot of you haven't heard of this. How many of you have heard of it? No hands go up and you say, I kind of knew that, but I'm telling you, this is powerful. Let me tell you this person's story, right? And that becomes part of your presentation, which is the third thing, quotes, questions, stories. Stories. How many stories have I already told you so far? You don't even know, right? I don't know. One of my stories caused me to think of a different story. It's caused me to think of a different story. And guess what? Because I have to do that because I'm about to tell you to tell stories. And if I tell you to tell stories by putting bullet points on the screen, that doesn't work, does it? Right? If I tell you to be interesting and I'm not interesting, that doesn't work. I tell you to be passionate and I'm not passionate, right? One of the toughest things about speaking is you got to practice what you preach, right? You got to practice what you preach. People learn with stories, right? People learn with examples. I didn't say one of the most important ways to establish credibility as a business owner is to be a speaker, right? I didn't say that. I said, let me tell you a story about how I've built credibility and how the only way that I continue to have a business, you're all better than me because you know how to go get customers, I don't. Well, in fact, I do. I know. I have one way, and it's this way. So when someone says, will you talk to a group of people, I say yes. Because I know writing a blog post isn't going to do it for me. I have books. Nobody's ever called me up and say, I read your book, and I want you to speak. What they say is, I saw you speak, I want your book, right? I know the way I get speeches is to do speeches, right? You might be better at that. You might have other ways. But the speaking itself is valuable regardless how you get it, and this is all I have, right? So I have to be good at it, right? I have to be good at it. So stories, and then the last one is statistics, right? The last one is statistics. If I tell you a story about my success as a speaker, if you're skeptical, what are you going to say to me? Well, Dave, that's just you. That's just an anecdote. That's not facts. That's just your particular experience. What does a statistic do? A statistic says it's not just me. It's not just this one time. This happens in a broader situation. Does that make sense? Okay? And so you use statistics in the same way you use quotes to support what you're saying with your stories, but with actual research and facts for the people who care more about those kinds of things. Does that make sense? So they're starting to get skeptical. They're starting to feel like this might be a little bit of bullshit. And you say that. You say, I know some of you might be skeptical and you might be thinking, Dave, that's just your story. So let me tell you, right? They did some research recently and they discovered, and with this, I haven't done that kind of quantifiable research, but basically every speaker I've ever met for my entire life, I've asked them, how do you get more speeches? And does anybody know what the number one and really the only answer any of them give me? Referrals, right? Referrals, right? Speakers do all the same things you do. They hire people to make calls. They hire people to make appointments. They hire people to look up data. They hire people to scrape data. They hire people to send cold emails. There's nothing better than having someone say, hey, you want to do this thing because somebody saw you and you did this thing at the other thing, right? And so that's why this is so important, right? Everything I'm sharing with you is not the way most people do their presentations. So if you do your presentations the way most people do their presentations, your presentation is not going to be good, and you will never get the next presentation. Does that make sense? And if you are currently doing free presentations and you are not getting more presentations, the thing to ask yourself is, what can I do to make this presentation better? Because that's the problem, right? And I'm not trying to be mean, but this is all I have. People say, well, of course you got better. Sure, I got better, but if I wasn't good enough the first time, you never get the second time, right? And so what most people do is they give a bunch of advice, they give you a bunch of information, they never draw you into it, and they never give you any story to tie it together, and you walk away with a bunch of notes, but without any kind of connection to it, right? So, what are we talking about today, right? So I'm going to summarize everything I'm going to tell you in the next 40 minutes with this. Persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea, right? Persuasive speakers, what does that mean? It means every presentation is an effort to persuade. Sometimes people say, no, Dave, this is just an informational session. It is never an informational session. You're trying to persuade people at the very least to pay attention to the information. Here's why most speakers are bad, because they overestimate people's interest in their presentation. Walk into every room that you ever speak to and say, nobody wants to be here and no one cares. Start there. and then build a presentation based on the assumption that no one wants to be there and nobody cares, right? I've literally had people come to my presentations and give me feedback afterwards and say, I didn't want to like it. Some people don't just come in, they come in because they want to shit on your presentation later. They come in to go, I know this is going to be bullshit and I want to watch it go down. No, I'm serious. I just had that. I couldn't do one of the road shows because I was emceeing an event in Virginia Beach, and I did 2 breakout sessions on a new book that I'm writing on personality. And this guy came up to me afterwards and he goes, I study this, I teach this is my whole career, and I walked in here knowing that this was going to be awful, and it was amazing, and I just want to say thank you. He wasn't just sitting there going, meh, he was in there going, I bet you're going to be, I know all the ways you're going to fail, I know all the things you're going to do wrong, and I'm just sitting in here to watch it. I want to watch you fail live, okay? Now, there's another funny TMT story, too, because sometimes your worlds intersect, right? So we got another EO guy. We have a couple EO guys over here. And that EO guy was at that conference I was just telling you about, right? So then you start seeing people that have multiple worlds. They have an EO world and they have a TMT world. So this guy that I don't know, who's in EO, he sends me an Instagram message, which I don't get a lot of those, especially from dudes. But that's the only way he knows how to contact me because we don't know each other. And he said, I saw you at TMT and I saw you being the MC, but he basically said, and I don't know how he said it and I should have looked it up, but he basically said, I thought you were funny and a silly clown guy, right? Like I liked it, but I just thought you were like some kind of entertainer, right? That's what I thought. And he goes, and then I came to your session and I found out that you're actually intelligent and know things, right? And he's like I had no idea. I just thought you were a lunatic. And then I found out like you have a brain. And so that's the power of what? Of speaking, being on stage, right? So persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. So let's just stop here. If they told me, Dave, you get 5 minutes, right? What am I going to do? Persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. How am I going to reinforce those stories? Or how am I going to reinforce that single idea? With stories, statistics, quotes, and questions, right? What's my single idea for today? I'm doing what I'm telling you to do, right? If you don't remember anything else from today, you walk into every presentation and you remind yourself, persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. You know the problem with most people's presentations? How many ideas are they trying to get across? An infinite number. An infinite number. And here's my least favorite thing that anybody ever says to me. Oh, I don't know, I'm just not going to have time to get through it. Then you're bad at your job. If they told me, Dave, you have 14 seconds, what would I do? I'd walk in and say, persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. And if you'd like to learn more, I'll be here for the next 2 days, and I'd love to talk to you about it. Thank you. And if you can remember this, you're going to be better than most of the people that you're ever going to go up against. Right? And do you even believe that persuasion is what you're doing? Again, these people want to know this. They need to know this. They're going to listen. They have to listen. You know more than anybody else. People have the entire world in their pocket. They're not even paying attention when you start. You're like, as long as I start off good, it's going to be okay. No, you're not, because they're not even paying attention to you when you start. Why do you think I use humor on stage? Because when I make you laugh, what happens to the people who aren't paying attention? They pay, I like to laugh. Well, if you like to laugh, you have to pay attention. Oh, okay, well, what's going on? And now they're paying attention because I rewarded the people who were paying attention, but I did it in a visible way. Does that make sense? It's like I'm throwing out money, I'm throwing out candy, and people are like, I like candy, I like money. Well, if you're not looking, you can't catch it, right? So you have to assume at the beginning that nobody wants to be there and that they have porn on their phone. Everything is on their phone. Things that are way better looking, way more interesting. There's so many better things on their phone. But they also have their spouse texting them about the fact that they found porn. No, but they have their babysitter, their kids are upset about something, they're getting an emergency call, a server's spinning. Does that make sense? Right? And you're up there going, I bet everybody wants. No, they don't want it. They don't care, right? So persuasive speakers, which assumes that every presentation you're giving is attempting to persuade people. And the first thing you're trying to persuade them to do is pay attention to you. Look up here. Listen to me. Pay attention. This is important, right? By the way, saying those words never works. It's like telling your wife to calm down, right? That's never going to work. That's never going to work, right? Hey, listen up here. I see some people who aren't. Let's listen up here. Or telling them a joke and nobody laughs, and you're like, that was funny. Let's get working on this. It's like it's never their problem, right? Persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea, right? So I want you to think about the worst presentation you've ever seen, right? I want you to think about the worst presentation you've ever seen, right? Then I want you to think about the best presentation you've ever seen, right? It's a little harder to think about the best because there's so many what? You're like, ooh, that worst one. There's so many, right? And we don't have time today to talk about all those things, but all you have to do to be a good presenter is remember the worst and don't do that, and remember the best and do that. But you know what we do? We tend to do what people do the most. It's like, well, other people in my industry do that, and they seem to be doing fine, so I'll just do the same thing. Part of the reason that I get to keep doing presentations for a living is because most people don't do it the way I do it, and it's better, right? So I have an advantage, right? I have an advantage because the competition doesn't tend to do things the way that I'm teaching, and I'm not the only one doing it. So what do I mean by powerful stories, right? And I teach CEOs to do this, and nobody does. Nobody listens. So let's talk about presentations. Forget making money from it. Forget the value of doing this out in the world. Think about doing this in your organization. So I show up at this place in Oregon. They make drones for recreational use, but also for commercial use and also for the military. And what I always teach CEOs, persuasive speakers tell powerful stories. What do most CEOs do? Our Q4 results are down to 47%, and what we're going to do is pursue some synergies so that in the future, what will provide some cost efficiencies through the use of technology and some more bullshit that I don't have time, right? Who's paying attention to that? No one. And the CEO didn't even write it, right? But they get through the hour-long presentation, and they're still the CEO, and their company still makes money. And so guess what? Everybody in the organization learns. You don't have to be a good communicator to be the CEO of an organization, so I'm going to do the same terrible presentations all the way down the line throughout the entire organization. So here's what the CEO did. He walked in the room. This was serious. This was a serious place. They put on my microphone. They put on his microphone. He didn't like his microphone. I said, I don't care. I'll take his microphone. He can have my microphone, because he was being a diva about it. And they said, no, you can't have his microphone because his microphone is encrypted and yours isn't. Oh, some serious shit going down here, right? It was also telling me that my stuff did not matter at all. You can say whatever you want. No one cares what you're saying, but we don't want people listening to what he's saying, right? So he got up there and he told a story, and the story goes like this. He said one of our drones was being used recently for overhead reconnaissance for a convoy in Iraq. And he said the drone operator was operating the drone and monitoring the convoy as they moved through the desert. And he noticed a pickup truck coming in the opposite direction at a high rate of speed. He immediately said the code word that they used to indicate to the people on the ground that there was danger, and then he just saw everything blow up in a cloud of dust. Right? And comms were down for a few minutes, and finally when the comms came back on, the people on the ground said, everyone is present and accounted for. Thank you for saving our lives, right? Are you ready to make some fucking drones, right? I was like, I don't know, is it soldering? Is that what we do? We solder them or do we weld them? Can we go to the factory right now and like make some of that? Like I was ready to go, right? I was ready to go. So now once he starts talking about other things, are people paying attention? Yeah, because they want to recreate those stories. And what he just did, if he got up there and said, what we all do is meaningful, and even if all you do is you just move the parts over to the section of the factory where then somebody, even you're valuable. Does anybody believe that? No. But everybody in this room just saved a bunch of lives of a bunch of American servicemen in the desert by doing a good job at what you do. And if you do a good job at what you do, you're going to be saving lives over there. Is everybody on board with that? Yeah. And you don't even have to say all that other BS. Do you see powerful stories? Right? Now, you might be like, well, we're not in the drone business, but you get the idea, right? And you are. Let me tell you, my biggest frustration with you all is people like you say to me, and I'm talking about you because it's happened at TMT stuff, what we do isn't sexy, Dave. What we do isn't sexy. Oh no, they just make fucking movies about it. Are you serious? Not only is what you do sexy, it's endlessly fascinating. It's endlessly fascinating. When we did the first 2-day, Paul Tracy was there. Was anybody else at the first one we did, August 2021, the first speaker training we did? Paul, raise your hand over there. Was anybody else at that one? Yeah, David Groot. Anybody else at that one? Right? And what we taught people was this storytelling method, and we had them get up there for 2 minutes and try it, and then the next day we had them get up for 5 minutes, and I still remember stories people told 2 years ago in a 5-minute presentation that they had, because people were talking about how the lady from accounting was sobbing in her office after she fell victim to the gift card scam, and they were talking about the emotional damage that was happening to a human being because they fell for a phishing scam and harmed their organization, and not the financial cost because it was only $500, but the reputational cost and the emotional cost of that person. And they were talking about a grandma who got ransomwared and lost the pictures that she had of her only granddaughter who had since passed away, and that was her only connection to her granddaughter, and they wanted $500 that she didn't have, and you think you're too small, no one's too small, and what if they take something that has priceless value, immense financial value? I still remember all those stories. Why? Because they're powerful, because what you do is really, really meaningful, right? And there's amazing stories. I wrote a whole speech for Small Business Tech Day, and I don't even do what you do based on stories I gathered from people, and they were powerful stories. There's also interesting and funny stuff. I started the speech off with funny things that people have done to hack road signs, right? They hack those road signs, like the construction signs, say like Rogue Panda on the loose and stuff like that, trapped in a sign factory, Godzilla on the rampage. There's funny stuff. You're like, this isn't funny. It's funny if you're looking for it. Does that make sense? It's interesting if you're looking for it. And important things are happening every day in your business. You're saving people from losing their business. I still remember Paul Tracy, I think, told a story about this guy. He went to sell him some cybersecurity services, and the guy was like, I think we're good. And a couple months later, and I still remember it because Paul told the story so well, he's driving by the guy's business, and he just sees blue lights everywhere, police vehicles all over the place, and he goes to find out what's going on, and the guy's like, we got ransomware, and that was it. They took everything. We've got nothing. I had to shut the whole business down. It's over, right? It's over, right? I tried to do it. It didn't work. The guy didn't want it. Is that a story you can tell somebody you're trying to sell cybersecurity? And you might, oh, they're just trying to. It's better than saying, well, you got to be careful because you might go bankrupt. No, let me tell you a story about someone in this town who I had a conversation with, and they didn't. But also, let me tell you a story. So here's two kind of stories to remember. Tell hope stories and tell fear stories. What's the mistake that most of you make when it comes to stories? Are you telling more hope stories or fear stories? You're telling fear stories. Fear stories shut people down. Hope stories open people up. There's got to be enough of the fear, right? But people need both. People need a push and a pull. They want to not have that happen, but they want to also benefit from something else. Does that make sense? Okay? So tell those hope stories and fear stories. So all we did during Small Business Tech Day was we told hope stories. This company invested, notice, didn't spend money, invested in cybersecurity, and then they got hacked, and we saved them with the backup, and we saved them with the SOC, and we saved them with the, does that make sense? And it happened. This company had insurance, and it saved them, and it paid for the forensic accountants to figure out what happened, and it helped them to protect their reputation because it wasn't their fault, it was somebody else's fault, and they were able to demonstrate that, but they wouldn't have been able to do it without insurance. And these people did compliance, and their compliance paid off when, right? People need more of those stories, right? Don't tell people to be compliant, tell them stories where compliance saves. Don't tell people to get insurance, tell them stories about how people, does that make sense? Right? So this is what I want you to think about. How much is it worth, right? How much is it worth? How much is it worth if you could inspire your people like the drone CEO did, right? How much is it worth if you're going to conferences and you're the industry authority and people just say, I want that person to run my IT because they seem to know what's going on? What would that be worth? Now, again, I can ask you that question, and I just did, but there's an answer to that, right? What was it worth to Apple, right? You can't even estimate it, can you? That their CEO didn't walk out there dancing like Bill Gates, right? And do some kind of terrible point-by-point explanation of the new thing. You had somebody who came out and told an interesting story about how this technology was going to change your life without even telling you even how it worked. What was it worth, right? What was it worth, right? What was it worth when Simon Sinek did a TED Talk, right, and got 56 million views? He was just like me, just some consultant guy who would talk to people, find your purpose. And then he gets a chance to get on the TED stage. He does his speech. It's one of the 5 most watched TED Talks on earth, right? right? And you might think, I'm never going to get on the TED stage. Maybe you won't, but here's a piece of advice. You want to be better at speaking and you want to build speaking part of your business, look for TEDx events in your area. You can just go to TEDx.com and they're all listed on there. Find one in your area, find one in your industry, find one that people in your network are running or organizing. Do that, because what does that do? That gets you a video, right? That gets you a video, and that video is something you can put on your website to say, here's a way, if you see this and you like this, you might want to hire me to come speak to you, right? Now, I know all of you aren't going to try to start speaking businesses, but I don't have a ton of time today, so I'll give you a couple of quick pieces of advice. Here's what you want with your speaking business. First of all, you want a separate website. Not you, the CEO, not another page on your website. Yourname.com, youspeak.com, something, right? Separate. Right? It's got a bio about you, not as just the owner of that business, but as an expert in your area, the books you wrote, the things you've done, the things you have an expertise. It has descriptions of 2 or 3 key presentations, right? It has a video, right? It has a video. And ideally, it seems old-fashioned, but it's not. If you can write a book or use one of the TMT programs, and I don't get paid to promote that stuff, I have 4 books. If you can write a book or do a TMT book, that is valuable, because there's a reason that people say that person literally wrote the book about something. And there's a big difference between going to someone who runs a conference and saying, I can do a talk about, fill in the blank, versus I can do a talk about this book I wrote about. Does that make sense? It just seems more, anybody can say, yeah, I can do a talk about. It's another thing to say, I wrote this book, and then I can do a talk about that book, right? I'm going to skip a couple of these, or I'm not. We told that one already. How many of you get nervous before you get up there, right? How many of you get nervous, right? So I was doing a presentation in Bahrain, and it was a presentation about how to give presentations. Bahrain, if you don't know, it's like Saudi Arabia looks like that moon boot. If you're old enough to remember what a moon boot looks like, it's that moon boot there. And there's a little island off the front shin of that moon boot called Bahrain. And it's a little country there about the size of a city. And they asked me to speak to these ladies at a big aluminum company who had gone through a presentation skills training, and they were about to give their presentations, and I was supposed to be a judge and give them feedback, but also do a little presentation as well. And I walked in the room, and you've never felt such pain and torment. Have you ever felt the emotions of other people in a situation? Like, I just walked in, and I just felt the dread and the unhappiness and the panic. Like they say dogs can smell fear. I could smell what was going on in that situation. So I closed my laptop. I didn't use any of my slides, and I started with a question. And I said, how are you doing right now? I said, how are you doing? By the way, the reason you raise your hand when you ask a question is because nobody wants to be first in a situation. So if you say, how many of you? If I go, how many of you? First of all, you don't know how I want you to respond. Are you supposed to shout? What are you supposed to do? But nobody wants to be the first person to do this. So if I do it first, other people will do it, right? But I said, how are you feeling right now? And they're like, oh, we're feeling sick, and we're going to throw up, and we're feeling panicked, and we're feeling nervous, and one person already had a heart attack, and somebody else had a stroke, and could I have done my presentation? Sure, but nobody was paying attention, right? So I asked a question, and then I asked another question. I said, how am I feeling right now? You feel fine. I said, well, why do I feel fine? You do this all the time. I said, okay. I said, I'm not from Bahrain, but where I come from, ladies talk a lot. I said, I don't know if that happens here. Does that happen here? Do you ladies, do you talk a lot? Yeah, we talk, but it's different. I said, okay, what's different about it? Well, it's not public speaking. And so this is what I want to leave you with, right? It is, right? It is. What people do wrong in their presentations is they treat it as a completely different thing, which means they have no experience at it, they're not good at it, and they have no idea what to do. Instead of saying, I've been talking since I was 2, I'm good at this. And every day at work, I talk to people on the phone, and I talk to people in meetings, and I do sales calls, and I have conversations. Think about it. What's your name? Paul. If I walk into work on a Monday morning and Paul goes, Dave, how was your weekend? I don't go, hold on, let me get PowerPoint up, and let's see what we can do. and I need to lay out my subpoints and my bullets, and I need to work through my overview, what do? I tell Paul a story about my weekend. Oh man, we took the kids to the beach, and guess what? I could talk to Paul for 20, 30, 40 minutes without any notes, because guess what? I was there. I was there for my whole weekend. I participated in it. So what's the best stories there? Your stories. Let me tell you about this customer that we worked with. Let me tell you about this quote from this book that I read. Let me tell you a story about how one of our employees helped one of our customers. Let me tell you a story about a time when I learned this important lesson. Let me tell you about it. And guess what? You could do that presentation for 7 hours and not look at anything and not have any slides. Does that make sense? Because you're telling stories. And so what I told him, I said, the biggest reason you have anxiety is because you're framing this whole thing as something that you don't do and that you don't have experience with. And you're doing another thing. You think that's the right way to do it. So I'm going to give you a way to reframe it. If you want to do better presentations, talk up here like you talk in the rest of your life. Does that make sense? Stop treating it like, that's what I'm doing, right? That's what I'm doing. I didn't know any different. But I just get up and I tell you about things that I've experienced, things that have happened to me, things that I know, things that I'm not reciting words on a page that don't have any connection to each other. I'm talking to you about things I know and things I've experienced, and I could do this all day long if I had to, right? Because you were there. You don't need notes. Oh, what did I do this weekend? And I mean, if you've got other sort of issues going on, you got to work on memory or whatever, but that's not what we're talking about. I was drunk all weekend, so I don't remember a lot of it. Okay, that's a different issue. You're an alcoholic, and you just back away from that conversation, right? But the reason you're nervous is because you're telling yourself you're not good at this. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what's going on, and you do. But you've been trained by other people to do presentations in a way that aren't good presentations, and those things you're not ready for, and you're not going to be good at. And even if you were good at it, it won't be good, because you'll be good at a bad way of giving presentations. So if you've got 2 minutes on stage, if you've got 5 minutes on stage, what do? How many of you would like to get better at? How many of you are frustrated by? Yeah, you're not the only one. I was talking to a business owner just the other day, one of my clients, and they said, blah, 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 I'm frustrated by blah, 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 right? And then we worked with them, and we offered them XYZ solution, and 3 months later, we were able to completely solve that problem, and they're not the only one. We've been doing a lot of research on our client satisfaction. We found that we've been able to help 77% of our clients with, right? 2 minutes. You're done. You laid it all out, and it's fine. There's no, I don't have time. I don't have time to cover it all. I couldn't get through it. I didn't have enough bullets. I didn't have slides. Does that make sense? It's a simple formula. You can just do that over and over and over. If you got more time, tell more stories, right? But persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce what? A single idea. You can tell a bunch of stories, but it all has to come back to, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to come see you at the booth? Do you want them to try it themselves? Do you want them to hire you? Because I'll give you, that'll be my last example. So I work with another guy who's a TMTer, Adam Pittman. He came to that first training that we did, and he lives not too far away from me. And so we work on his cybersecurity presentations that he does for trainings and other stuff like that. And we came up with a single idea for him. No one is completely safe from cyber attacks, but protection can be simple and inexpensive. Because what's one of the most simple and inexpensive things you can do? Train people not to, right? You don't have to buy all the stuff. You need to keep people from screwing it up, right? And a lot of the things, change your passwords. A lot of that stuff you just need people to do. It doesn't cost any money. And you can spend an infinite amount of money and people can still screw you because they're like, oh, Carl, it looks like we're about to win a fishing trip. And then that's all over. You're like, no, it's fishing with a PH. Damn it, Carl, we've taught you this. What he's trying to teach people is like, you can do this and you should do this and you should get started, and there's responsibilities you need to take. You can't farm all of this out to someone else. But when I have John DePero and I'm helping him at the roadshow talk about compliance, that's not the message. The message is not, yeah, you got it. The message is, you probably can't do this and you need a partner who understands it that you can work with. So we had him just put up one page of like the 256 pages about the new rules for like managing credit cards, and he just highlighted like 3 sentences and was like, How much would it cost you and how much time would it take for you to do those 3 things, and left everybody in the room with, I could use some help from John? Yeah. The message was, so you have to know what's your single idea, right? What's your single idea that you're trying to reinforce? And my single idea that I'm trying to reinforce is persuasive speakers tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea, right? And if you do that, right? If you do that, people will remember you. You'll have another opportunity to do it again, and you'll have success that you cannot have anticipated when you began. Thank you very much.